Darkness crept through the corridors of Maplewood's only performing arts center as rumors spread about a series of tapes left behind by an eccentric hypnotist named Dr. Alistair Rowe. He had once attracted sold-out crowds in the same building, mesmerizing participants with illusions of grandeur and feats of impossible suggestion. Then, seemingly overnight, he vanished. In his wake, he left a box of dusty reel-to-reel recordings, each marked only with a cryptic spiral symbol. According to whispered accounts from stagehands who had discovered the tapes, anyone who listened to them for more than a few moments felt an inexplicable dread. Some swore the swirling patterns on the tape boxes seemed to pulse as though alive. Others recounted hearing Dr. Rowe's voice urging them forward, deeper into some hypnotic labyrinth of the mind. Whatever the case, no one doubted that something was deeply wrong with these recordings. Yet an irresistible fascination drew people to them nonetheless. The local police tried to confiscate the tapes, suspecting them to be connected to Dr. Rowe's disappearance. True to rumor, every officer who attempted to catalog or examine the tapes suffered insomnia, nightmares, and a recurring feeling that someone was peering over their shoulders. In desperation, the force eventually locked the box away inside the archiving room, ensuring they could not be accessed without official clearance. But no lock felt secure enough to ward off the unsettling sense of what the tapes yet held. Not long after, reports of inexplicable behaviors and breakdowns spread among residents across the city. One woman claimed she saw Dr. Rowe's face reflected in her own mirror late at night. A young man insisted that the odd pattern on his bedroom wallpaper lit up with dancing shapes whenever he tried to sleep. The incidents piled up so quickly that the entire town bristled with anxiety. Among the people unsettled by the tapes was Danielle Armitage, a freelance reporter known for her tenacity in dealing with mysteries. She had once interviewed Dr. Rowe for a piece on alternative therapies, enthralled by his ability to induce almost impossible states of trance. She remembered clearly his silver-gray eyes, which seemed to flicker with a fierce obsession whenever he described the human mind's hidden depths. He spoke about transcending traditional forms of hypnosis, about forging direct pathways between the hypnotist's consciousness and the subject's psyche. The interview had left her both fascinated and uneasy, the skin on her arms tingling whenever she recalled his measured tone of voice. After hearing that Dr. Rowe might still be alive but hiding, and that his tapes were causing madness, Danielle convinced her editor at the local newspaper to let her investigate. The public craved answers. Did the tapes really fuel nightmares? And where had Dr. Alistair Rowe disappeared to? She spent hours in the newspaper's dusty archives, combing through old articles, performance reviews, and personal accounts from former hypnotist show participants. Nearly everyone interviewed described Dr. Rowe as mesmerizing and brilliant, but also deeply unpredictable. He claimed his ultimate goal was to break through the fortress of consciousness, to make direct contact with the id, the primal, swirling chaos beneath each person's psyche. Danielle's search eventually led her to the caretaker of the Performing Arts Center, an elderly man named Walter. He had been working the night the tapes were discovered. Walter explained he had unlocked Dr. Rowe's private rehearsal room to air it out, suspecting Dr. Rowe had abandoned the lease. Instead, he found a wrought iron stand holding a locked trunk. The trunk emitted faint static sounds, as if something inside was quietly humming with life. Intrigued, yet unnerved, Walter took the trunk to the main stage, where colleagues helped him pry it open. Oddly, the moment that trunk was forced open, a wave of dizziness struck them, and the lights overhead flickered. At first they thought it was just old wiring, but as they sifted through the trunk's contents, photographs of warped faces, half-burned journals scribbled with cryptic passages, and small glass vials filled with an unknown liquid, everyone felt an immediate sense of panic. At the bottom lay the tapes in question, each labeled only by the spiral symbol. Whether by hubris or curiosity, Walter admitted that he and his colleagues had tried playing one tape on an antique projector in the basement. At first, it was only static, crackling with the faint hiss of an empty track. Then, Dr. Rowe's voice emerged. Soft, insistent, a gentle echo that promised release from all worry, all fear. Walter described the sensation of that voice filling the room as akin to a heavy blanket draped over his consciousness, pulling him inward. One of the stagehands screamed in terror, as if he had seen something in the empty basement corner that no one else could discern. Another man collapsed, muttering that the air had turned thick, suffocating. Walter quickly turned the machine off, but it was already too late. That night, every person who attended that viewing slept horribly. One man left town the next morning, never to be heard from again. With trembling hands, Walter shared a battered notebook with Danielle. Inside, written in Dr. Rowe's meticulous handwriting, were records of dimensional induction sessions. Rowe believed he had discovered a method to link mind to mind beyond the norm, to push his voice into someone's subconscious so deeply that he could reshape their perceptions at will. Drawings of swirling patterns and fractal mazes, interspersed with commentary about tapping into cosmic energies, filled the notebook's pages. One diagram in particular showed a shape reminiscent of a labyrinth, with multiple entries and exits, each labeled with different emotional states: fear, euphoria, despair, ecstasy. Danielle's breath caught in her throat when she noticed Marginale claiming that if the subject ventured too far into their own labyrinth, pieces of them might never return. Her investigation became an obsession. She started dreaming of Dr. Rowe's sharp eyes in the darkness, his voice whispering instructions she could never fully recall upon waking. Sometimes, in these dreams, Danielle stood upon a stage surrounded by swirling lights. She would hear Rowe telling her to release herself from reality, to trust his words, to follow the upward spiral. The next morning, her heart would race with a sense of having narrowly escaped some mental trap. Yet a grim fascination persisted, persuading her that the only way to solve the puzzle was to listen to one of the tapes. Rationally, she knew that might be reckless, but she couldn't shake the compulsion. Eventually, Danielle managed to convince Detective Garza, an old family friend, to let her examine the tapes locked in the police archive. It took repeated pleas, citing the public's right to know, the possibility of a hidden crime, and the general well-being of the force itself. She even argued that if the tapes had any real power, it was better to have them studied in a controlled environment than left to rot in the evidence locker. Garza, looking drawn and exhausted, finally relented. He arranged a private viewing in one of the police department's small interrogation rooms. As an added safeguard, 2 officers were posted outside, with orders to intervene if they heard anything abnormal. The small reel-to-reel projector clicked and whirred as the tape began to play. At first, there was nothing but a faint white noise, like distant waves crashing against a shore. Then, Dr. Rowe's voice emerged from the static, calm, measured, inviting. He spoke slowly, almost hypnotically, leading the listener through a series of visualizations, encouraging them to descend into themselves. Danielle felt her pulse quicken. She shut her eyes, not sure if that would help or worsen the effect. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw fragmented memories float by. Her father reading her bedtime stories as a child, the day she got promoted at work, and the last argument she had with a close friend. She tried to ground herself, focusing on the steady hum of the projector, but Rowe's voice had an uncanny quality. The more she tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to slip under her thoughts, pushing aside everything else. His intonation shifted from soothing to commanding, urging her to remove the boundaries her mind had built and let in the truth of a higher reality. Odd lights flickered behind her eyelids, and she had the sensation of spinning in a dizzy circle. She fought the dizziness, momentarily opening her eyes and catching a glimpse of the tape's reel spinning under the projector's lamp. The shadows in the room began to ripple and twist, as though forming figures. She could almost see Dr. Rowe's silhouette leaning over her, an otherworldly presence in the suffocating darkness. A strangled cry escaped her lips. Detective Garza lurched forward, fumbling with the projector switches. The tape squealed in protest as it ground to a halt. In that moment, Danielle realized tears were streaming down her cheeks, her breath heaving as if she had just run a long distance. Garza looked likewise shaken, his normally steely composure replaced by a pale, sweaty tension. The overhead fluorescent lighting flickered. The 2 officers rushed in, brandishing flashlights and demanding to know if everything was all right. Danielle couldn't speak. She could only look at Garza, whose eyes brimmed with the same unspoken terror and enthrallment. In the days that followed, Danielle found herself haunted by snippets of Dr. Rowe's voice that replayed in her head unbidden. Simple tasks like cooking dinner or checking emails were interrupted by echoes of the tape's commands. Occasionally, she'd feel an urge to lock herself in a dark room, wanting the hush of oblivion. At other times, she felt an inexplicable euphoria surging from nowhere, like a quiet mania that made her heart pound and her hands shake. One particularly vivid episode struck while she was doing laundry. She looked up from the washing machine's swirling foam and saw Dr. Rowe's face reflected in a swirl of suds, a horrifying distortion, half human, half shadow. She stepped back, nearly falling, her heart hammering as she tried to distinguish hallucination from reality. Despite the fear gnawing at her, she continued her search for clues about Dr. Rowe's whereabouts. If the tapes were driving people to insanity, she reasoned, maybe Dr. Rowe himself had been consumed by whatever force he had tried to harness. Scouring the battered notebook again, she found references to a hidden laboratory or workshop that Rowe had leased somewhere outside city limits. The address was incomplete, but it mentioned an abandoned orchard along the old highway. Late one afternoon, Danielle forced herself into her car and made the winding drive away from Maplewood's center, through barren fields and patches of trees. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and thunder rumbled in the distance, mirroring the pit of quiet dread forming in her belly. She found the orchard easily enough, its grove of twisted, leafless trees creaking eerily. Off a dirt track, well out of sight, sat an old barn with a crooked roof. The sliding doors were slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of darkness within. Danielle hesitated, heart pounding, but her need for answers propelled her inside. The smell of moldy hay mingled with something sharp, almost chemical. She flicked on a flashlight and found rows of tattered chairs arranged in concentric circles, all facing a tall stand with a large screen. Some half-broken electronic devices lay strewn about, and on the far side of the barn she spotted what appeared to be a makeshift recording booth. Scattered around the booth were more reels labeled with that sinister spiral. A single candle stub flickered in a corner, as if someone had been there recently. Danielle's flashlight beam landed on a cot, next to which lay a heap of Dr. Rowe's clothing signature black coat and dress shoes, coated in dust. Kneeling, she examined what looked like a worn leather portfolio. Inside she found more of Dr. Rowe's notes, diagrams of the human brain, with lines connecting different regions, labeled spiritual passage, liminal boundary, or transcendental gateway. Some references implied he was experimenting not only with hypnosis, but with something akin to astral projection, or even tapping into realms beyond normal cognition. A slip of paper tucked into the folder read, in a shaky scrawl, "We must see it through. The final step is upon us." That was all. Suddenly, a shifting in the shadows made her spin around. Standing by the rickety door was Dr. Rowe. His once sharp eyes were ringed with fatigue. He looked gaunt, almost spectral, but that same fierce obsession glimmered beneath his exhaustion, as though he had glimpsed something that both terrified and exhilarated him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, softly, he addressed her by name. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of its usual polish. He explained that his experiments had gone further than any hypnotist had ever dared. He had discovered a way to link minds, but at the cost of letting something else, a force beyond human comprehension, slip into those minds as well. He told her he'd disappeared because he realized the tapes were dangerous, yet he felt compelled to continue perfecting his process. Something had guided him, or so he claimed. A presence that communicated with him in dreams, urging him to push the boundaries of human consciousness. Now he lived in a twilight state, barely existing outside his endless attempts to refine the tapes. He believed that if used correctly, the recordings could open a door to a higher plane, a dimension teeming with knowledge and power. But if misused, even slightly, the mind that listened could become a broken vessel, losing grip on reality altogether. Danielle tried to remain calm as Dr. Rowe's voice washed over her again, this time in person, no longer just a disembodied recording. She asked him if he knew what the tapes had done to the people in Maplewood, how they had stoked paranoia and nightmares. He nodded with a resigned sorrow, insisting he hadn't intended harm. His dream was to free people from the limitations of their narrow realities, not to destroy them. But something had gone awry early on. The cosmic energies he tried to channel were far more chaotic than he had realized. He suspected that presence was feeding off human consciousness, drawing out fear and pain to strengthen itself. She demanded to know how it could be stopped. The people needed to be freed from the tape's influence, and if Dr. Rowe was telling the truth, that he was able to manipulate consciousness, surely he could figure out how to reverse the effect. Was there a counter-recording or a method to close the mental door once it was opened? He hesitated, sweeping a trembling hand across his face. Then, glancing down at the portfolio Danielle held, he reached for one of the diaries stuffed inside. Guards scribbled across some pages in another language, or perhaps an encoded script Rowe had created. He explained that if one listened to a specific sequence of instructions, the reverse spiral induction he had been trying to perfect, there was a chance to break the link. But he had never tested it. Fear flickered in his eyes as he admitted that attempting the reversal carried its own risks. If done incorrectly, it might plunge the subject into permanent psychosis. Despite the dread coursing through her, Danielle insisted she was willing to try. She had glimpsed, firsthand, how Dr. Rowe's tapes could unravel a mind. She felt it happening in herself, creeping like a fungus through her rational thoughts. If there was any hope of cutting off the tape's power, she had to seize it. Through a scattering of half-written notes, Rowe pieced together a new reel. Danielle noticed how his hands shook, how sweat dotted his brow. By the time he finished, the old barn was cloaked in dusk, and the only light was the flicker of that stubborn candle. They set the reel onto the projector. Rowe inhaled deeply and clicked it on. A faint crackle of static filled the barn. Then, instead of the smooth, seductive tone from before, Rowe began counting backward, guiding the listener through a labyrinth of mental corridors. The instructions were precise, each step described in layered detail, visualizing spiral paths leading back to a central core, shining with clarity. The words were mesmerizing, but unlike his previous tapes, there was no enticing promise of cosmic secrets. Instead, there was an increasing emphasis on closure, carefully shutting heavy doors, sealing windows, locking trap doors. At one point, Danielle felt a bloom of panic. She heard something in the static behind Rowe's voice, a low growl, like an angry wind. She realized it could be that presence, furious at being pushed out. Still, she forced herself to focus on Rowe's command. She pictured every entrance in her mind shutting tight. She conjured the swirl of intangible shapes that had haunted her dreams, and she envisioned them dissolving into harmless mist. The voice from the reel became nearly deafening, weaving through her thoughts. She felt pain pressing against the inside of her skull, as if something were unwilling to release its grip on her psyche. A flicker of fleeting euphoria tempted her, a final attempt to lure her away from the path. But she fought on. The presence howled. Or maybe that noise came from the reel-to-reel machine, straining against the final instructions. Then came a surge of white noise, snapping her back as though a rubber band had broken. When the tape ended, Danielle found herself kneeling on the barn's dirt floor, her sweat-drenched hair clinging to her forehead. Dr. Rowe stood over her, breathing heavily, supporting himself against the projector stand. For a moment, neither spoke. Danielle felt a bruising ache in her temples. But something inside her had shifted, a quietness in her mind where previously there had been frantic whispers. She suspected the tape's reversal process had worked, at least for her. One question remained: how many others could be helped? Dr. Rowe vowed to create a more stable, widespread version of the reversal recording. He claimed that, in the right hands, the tape could be broadcast or distributed to break the hypnotic influence still plaguing Maplewood. Yet he acknowledged a chilling truth. The presence he had invited into the tapes might not vanish entirely. They may have only starved it temporarily. There are always new doors, he whispered. Curiosity, fear, desperation. These are openings, cracks for it to slip through. Danielle felt a tremor of apprehension at these words. recalling how easily her own fascination had drawn her in. As night fully descended, lightning flashed through the open barn doors, illuminating the orchard's skeletal trees. Danielle left Dr. Rowe in that dilapidated shelter, poring over his notes. She promised she would get help, find resources for him to finalize the reverse tapes and share them safely. Outside, the humid air hummed with the charge of a looming storm. In the distance, thunder rolled across the fields, an echo of the cosmic energies that Dr. Rowe had trifled with. Daniel realized that while their immediate crisis might be contained, the shadows lurking in human consciousness could never be fully exorcised. She drove away, determined to see that Maplewood would not succumb to madness again. And yet, she could not shake the feeling that, in some deeper realm, Dr. Alistair Rowe had become merely an instrument for the presence he claimed to have banished. Even reversed, the tapes might still carry the seeds of that primal alien darkness, waiting for the next curious listener to crack them open, letting the swirling spirals invade the unsuspecting mind once more.